Wyoming Territory, late October 1877, the wind howled through the broken slats of the barn wall, and the smell of frost was thick on the air when she pushed the heavy door open with her shoulder, a bundled baby in one arm and desperation in her eyes. "Hello," her voice cracked through the cold and the dark. "Please, anyone." The horses shifted in their stalls. A lantern flickered to life behind a stack of hay bales, and a man stepped into view. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a battered hat pulled low and a thick coat thrown over his long frame. His face was worn, the kind of worn that came from heartache and years of silence, not time. He stopped dead when he saw her. She clutched the baby closer to her chest, her fingertips blue from the cold. "I didn't know where else to go." The man stared, then slowly set the lantern on a beam. "You brought a baby into my barn. I had no choice." His voice was low, hoarse, like he hadn't spoken aloud in days. "Who are you?" "Josie Shepard. This is my daughter, Eliza." Her knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself on the stall rail. "We've been walking since yesterday morning. I couldn't stay where we were anymore." Not after. She shook her head and looked down at the baby, who whimpered against her chest. The man came forward slowly, like a man approaching a wounded animal. "You're freezing. Come on." Josie let herself be led to the far corner of the barn, where a potbelly stove sputtered with weak heat. He threw in more wood, then lit another lantern and hung it above them. The light made his face clearer now, early 30s maybe, with sun-worn skin, a scar beneath his jaw, and eyes that looked like they had seen too much. "I'm Silas Boone," he said quietly. "This is my place." She unwrapped Eliza's blanket enough to let the heat touch her cheeks. "I'm sorry for barging in. I saw the smoke from your chimney. I didn't think anyone lived out here. Not many do, that's the point." Josie looked up at him. "Are you going to make us leave?" Silas didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched beside her and looked at the baby. "How old is she?" 3 months. "She needs food, and you need rest." He stood and grabbed a kettle from the shelf. "I have goat's milk." "Might not be much, but it is warm." She blinked hard, eyes burning with more than cold. "Thank you." As he worked, she watched him. His hands were steady, his movements careful. Everything about him was quiet but strong. She felt herself breathe for the first time in hours. Silas handed her a tin cup of milk. "You want to tell me what happened?" Josie hesitated. Then slowly she nodded. "My husband died last winter. Fever took him fast. We were living with his older brother, but after Eliza was born, things changed. He said I was a burden. Said I should give the baby to a couple in Cheyenne and go make myself useful somewhere else." Silas's jaw tightened. "And you left." "I took what I could carry and ran." He said nothing, just poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. The barn was quiet except for the crackling stove and the soft suckle of Eliza's lips against the cup. Josie looked down at her daughter, then back at Silas. "I did not mean to force myself on you." "You didn't." His voice was quieter now. "You just brought me back to life." She stared at him, unsure if she had heard right. Silas looked at the fire. "My wife died giving birth 3 years ago. The baby too. Since then, it's just been me and these horses. I stopped talking to people. Stopped. Everything." Josie held her breath. "And then tonight, you came through that door with a baby in your arms and hope still in your eyes, and I remembered what it felt like to be needed." Josie looked down, heart hammering. "I ain't asking you for anything," he said. "But you do not have to keep running, not tonight." She nodded slowly. "Thank you." Silas stood and grabbed a bedroll from a shelf, spreading it out near the stove. "You sleep here, I'll be in the loft, Silas." He paused. "I do not know what tomorrow brings. But tonight this," she looked around at the walls and the quiet and the warmth, "this is the safest I have felt in months." He nodded once. "Then sleep. I will keep watch." The next morning broke cold but clear. Josie woke to the smell of cornbread and oats. Eliza was still asleep, tucked into a folded horse blanket. Silas had left a plate beside her and was already outside chopping wood. She stepped out into the morning light, pulling her shawl tight. "You should have woken me." "I could have helped. You were dead on your feet." Josie walked closer, watching his axe rise and fall. "You live out here alone, by choice. You do not seem like the kind of man who wants to be alone." "I did, until yesterday." Josie felt her cheeks warm. She looked away, then back at him. "You do not have to take care of us, I know." He set down the axe and turned to her. "But I want to." Her heart stumbled. He stepped closer. "You and that baby knocked something loose in me. I do not know what this is yet, but I want to find out." Josie could barely breathe. "Me too." They stood in the sunlight, the barn behind them, the wind cold but the space between them warm. For the first time in a long time, Josie smiled. And Silas smiled back. The frost held on through morning, turning fence posts to silver and the pasture to pale glass. Josie stood at the edge of the corral, arms crossed against the wind, watching Silas lead a bay mare through her paces. He moved with a quiet steadiness, boots crunching in the brittle grass, hand resting light on the reins. The horse trusted him. It was in the way she followed his movements without hesitation, like they spoke in a language that didn't need sound. Josie hadn't meant to stay. But when Silas handed her a bowl of stew the night before and told her she could sleep as long as she needed, she hadn't argued. Now, with Eliza wrapped snug in a sling across her chest, she watched the land stretch out in every direction, golden, wide, and still untouched by the worst of winter. Silas brought the mare to a stop and glanced over. "She's half broke. Won't carry weight yet, but she's smart. I think she'll come around." Josie shifted Eliza higher against her chest. "You train them all yourself." "I do." "Why horses?" He rubbed the mare's neck, his fingers disappearing into her thick winter coat. "They don't lie. They don't pretend to be anything they're not. You earn their trust or you don't." Josie nodded and let the silence rest between them. "You ever work with animals?" he asked. "No." She looked down at Eliza. "Closest I came was feeding chickens at my sister's place when I was a girl, but I liked them. They were easy to understand." He leaned on the fence post and looked at her for a long moment. "You've got a way of watching like you see more than most. I had to learn to read people fast. When you depend on someone who doesn't want to be depended on, you figure out how to stay ahead of their moods." Silas's jaw twitched slightly. "That man, your husband's brother, he ever put hands on you?" Josie didn't flinch. "No, but he didn't have to." "There's more than one way to make a woman feel small." Silas nodded once, then looked out across the pasture. "You're not small here." That caught her breath. She didn't answer, just pressed her lips to Eliza's downy head. By midday, the sun softened the cold. Josie helped carry water from the well, pouring slowly into the trough while Silas repaired a broken fence rail. She worked in silence, sleeves rolled to her elbows, arms aching in a way that felt good-earned. When they paused to eat, she sat beside him on the flat rock near the shed. He handed her a biscuit and a slab of cured ham wrapped in cloth. "You got anyone looking for you?" he asked. "No. My people are back east. We lost contact after I married. I think they gave up on me when I didn't come home after he died." Silas tore a piece of bread with his teeth, chewing slow. "You want to write them?" Josie hesitated. "Not yet." He nodded like that answer made sense to him. A gust of wind rattled the dry branches overhead. Eliza stirred and Josie rocked her gently. "You always planned to live this far out." "My father worked cattle near Rawlins. Thought I'd follow him, but he died before I could finish learning the trade. After that, I went north. Found this old homestead sitting empty, fixed it up best I could. You built all this alone, mostly. Neighbor helped with the roof." but he moved down to Colorado last spring. Josie traced the edge of her tin plate with her thumb. You ever think about leaving? Used to. But the idea of starting over somewhere else didn't sit right. I figured if I stayed long enough, maybe something worth keeping would find its way here. She looked up at him, her breath shallow. He met her gaze, steady and unflinching. I don't believe in luck much, but I believe in timing. Josie didn't look away. And what do you think this is? I think it's the start of something neither of us expected. Her voice came out softer than she meant. I don't know what I have to offer. You're here. You're standing. You're raising a child with grit and grace. That's more than most. She blinked hard, then reached for the cloth to wipe Eliza's chin. I'm not looking for someone to save us. I'm not offering that. His tone was gentle but firm. What I can offer is a place that's yours as long as you want it. And a man who means what he says. Josie didn't say anything for a while, then she stood, lifting Eliza in her arms. I should get her inside before the wind picks up again. Silas stood too, brushing crumbs from his coat. I'll finish the fence. You go on. As she walked back toward the barn, her shawl flaring behind her, she felt something loosen inside her chest, something tight and sore and long-held. It wasn't gone, but it had shifted, made room for something quieter. That evening, after Eliza had been fed and laid down in the cradle Silas had pulled from the loft and dusted clean, Josie sat near the stove and watched the fire. Silas came in from the dark, his coat dusted with snowflakes that caught the lantern light. I cleared the trough, he said, setting his gloves on the hook. Shouldn't freeze too hard tonight. Josie nodded and sipped the tea he'd made from dried mint and willow bark. Silas sat across from her, stretching his legs out toward the hearth. You think you'll stay a few more days? I think, she said slowly. I'd like to. He didn't smile, but the corners of his eyes softened. Then that settled. They sat in the warm hush of the barn's back room, neither speaking, neither needing to. The wind moved gentle against the walls, and Eliza sighed in her sleep. For the first time in a long time, Josie didn't think about what came next. She only listened to the fire, to the quiet, and to the steady rhythm of a man beginning to mean something. Wind scratched through the cottonwoods by the creek that ran behind the barn, dry leaves tumbling across the hard, packed ground. Josie crouched near the waterline, sleeves damp from rinsing the washcloth she'd used to clean Eliza's face. The baby blinked up at her from the sling tied snug against her chest, cheeks pink from the cold. Behind her, the sound of boots on pebbles approached slow and steady. You planning on walking to the next county with that little one strapped to you? Silas's voice held a quiet amusement, not unkind. Josie smiled without turning, just getting her used to the sound of running water. She sleeps better when she hears it. He stepped beside her, hands tucked into his coat pockets. Didn't know that. I didn't either until 2 nights ago when she cried every time I set her down in the loft. Then she calmed the moment the wind picked up outside. Josie straightened, brushing a wet curl from her forehead. She likes motion, and she likes sound that isn't voices. Silas glanced toward the stream. She's got her own mind already. She does. They stood in silence a while, the water whispering over smooth rocks. Josie took a slow breath, her shoulders easing. I've been meaning to ask, Silas said, shifting his weight. That name Eliza, it have meaning to you? Josie adjusted the sling. It was my grandmother's. She raised 7 boys on a patch of land outside St. Louis. Wore her apron like armor. Always smelled like yeast and wood smoke. She used to say, "Don't wait on the world to make you comfortable, girl. Just learn to keep moving forward." Silas looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting just slightly. She sounds like someone who'd have known how to ride out a hard season. She'd have liked it here. No one to tell her what to do. Josie turned back toward the barn, and Silas fell into step beside her. The ground was soft underfoot, the thaw beginning to push against the cold. "You always been on the move?" he asked. "My father was a telegrapher. We followed railroad lines for years. When I was 16, he sent me to live with my older sister in Nebraska. He said I needed to learn what it meant to stay in one place." "Did you?" Josie shook her head. "Not really. I married too young to a man who needed more from me than I ever knew how to give. Then after he passed, I tried to stay put for Eliza's sake, but it never held." Silas was quiet for a few steps. "Think this place might—" Josie stopped walking, boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. "I don't know yet. But I want to find out." He nodded, barely so, as if any more would tip something between them. They reached the barn. Inside, the smell of hay and animal warmth wrapped around them. Josie unfastened the sling and laid Eliza in the empty grain box lined with soft cloth. The baby stirred once, then settled. Silas leaned against a post, arms folded. "I've been thinking about building a second room under the back of this place, just a lean-to at first, something warmer than the loft." Josie brushed straw from her skirt. "You don't need to do that, I know. But I want to." He looked at her, voice low. "If you plan to stay, even for a little while, you shouldn't have to sleep beside a stove in a barn corner." Josie studied him for a moment. "You'd build a room for someone who might leave." "I'd build it because it feels like the right thing to do." She crossed her arms, not from cold but thought. "You ever consider hiring help, a man to fix fence or tend the herd when it grows?" "I've thought about it, but I need someone I can trust. And the kind of men who are looking for work this far out usually come with more trouble than they're worth." Josie stepped closer, hands loose at her sides. "What if you didn't hire a man? What if you had someone who could learn alongside you?" His brow lifted slightly. "You offering? I can cook, clean, mend, carry water, and I'm learning not to be afraid of horses. I've learned harder things." Silas didn't answer right away. Then he pushed off the post and stepped closer. "I wouldn't expect anything from you you weren't ready to give." "I'm not offering out of obligation," she said, voice steady. "I'm offering because I want to build something that doesn't disappear the moment the wind shifts." He reached out slowly, like she might vanish if he moved too fast, and tucked a bit of hair behind her ear. "If you stay," he said, "it's not just the room I'll build. It'll be a life." Josie's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. "Then let's start with the room." His hand brushed hers, rough palm against her chilled fingers. They stood inches apart, the air between them warmer than the stove's fire. Outside, the wind settled for the first time in days. Inside, Eliza slept, the silence around her not empty but full. The first snow came overnight, quiet and thick, blanketing the pasture in a soft hush. Josie stood at the cabin's new threshold, shawl drawn close, gazing out at the whitewashed ground where fence posts rose like dark teeth in the morning light. Smoke curled from the stovepipe behind her, and the faint clatter of Silas hammering in the lean-to carried through the cold. Inside, Eliza stirred in her basket bed, cheeks flushed from warmth, not fever. Josie tucked another quilt around her, then crossed the room to check the kettle hanging over the stove. The water was near boiling. She lifted it with a cloth-wrapped hand and poured slowly into the tin basin set on the table. Silas had salvaged the table from a neighbor's ruined house before the roof caved last spring. He told her that 2 days ago while they'd sat side by side peeling root vegetables, his voice low, the story offered without weight. She'd listened, nodding just once, and gone on with the peeling. Now, she dipped a rag into the hot water and began wiping soot from the windowpane nearest the door. The snow brightened as the glass cleared. The land looked softer somehow, like it had let go of breath it hadn't known it was holding. The door opened behind her with a muted scrape. Josie didn't turn. "I can see the ridge better through this one now," she said. "Once the sun's higher, it might reach the far edge of the pasture." Silas stepped in, brushing snow from his sleeves. "Told you that window just needed cleaning." She glanced back at him. "You didn't say it out loud." He pulled off his gloves and set them near the stove to dry. "Didn't figure I had to." Josie returned to the glass. "You have a way of not saying things." Silas leaned against the inner wall, arms crossed loosely. "You want to ask something, you can." She looked at him fully now. "What did you do before the horses? Before this place?" He studied the floorboards for a moment. "I rode for the Union side. Quartermaster's assistant. Didn't fire a rifle unless things went bad. After Appomattox, I drifted. Took odd jobs, drove wagons, split logs for a man near Casper who drank too much and paid in beans." Josie waited. "Eventually, I got offered a gelding and a saddle in exchange for 3 months' work. Took both and rode west. Ended up here." She nodded slowly. "You ever think about going back east?" He shook his head. "Too many ghosts behind me. The ones out here keep their distance." Josie moved to the stove and stirred the pot simmering there. "You don't talk about your wife." Silas's hands stilled. "No." Was she kind? He looked at her then, and something in his face shifted. She was young, barely 19, laughed easy, hummed when she hung laundry. She didn't get much time to be more than that. Josie folded her hands over her stomach. "I'm sorry." He nodded once, then walked to the window she'd cleaned and looked out. "You miss her?" He didn't answer right away. "I miss what I thought we'd have. I miss the sound of someone else breathing in the dark." A long silence stretched between them, still but not sharp. Josie stepped beside him, close enough that their arms nearly touched. "I don't think I ever had what you did, but I miss the idea of being looked at and seen." Silas turned to her, something unspoken in his gaze. "I see you." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "You're not the same man I met that night. I know that. You're steadier now, warmer." "You did that." She reached for his hand, hesitated, then laid her fingers over his. "I don't want to be a guest anymore." "You're not." "I want to share more than just space with you." Silas's hand turned under hers, fingers wrapping slowly around hers. "Then stay, not just through snow. Stay when the thaw comes and the creek swells and the ground turns to mud." Josie looked down at their joined hands, then back at him. "I will." He leaned forward, not rushing, not asking, just offering. She met him halfway, lips brushing his with the same gentleness she used when lifting Eliza from sleep. It wasn't hunger, it was belonging. When they parted, Silas didn't let go of her hand. "You've got a place here. We'll build it slow but strong." Josie smiled, the kind of smile that didn't need to be wide to be true. "Then let's start with today." Outside, the snow kept falling, steady and silent. But inside, the fire crackled, the baby stirred, and 2 people who had carried too much for too long finally laid something down. Snow still clung to the ridgeline by the time February settled in, but the sky had softened to a gentler gray, and the winds no longer cut like they had in December. Josie stood barefoot inside the cabin, pressing her heel into the newly planed floorboard Silas had laid the day before. It was smooth beneath her skin, warm from the morning fire. A kettle hissed gently on the stove. Eliza lay awake in her basket beside the hearth, watching shadows play across the log wall. Josie hummed low, not any song she recognized, just a sound to keep the baby company while she stitched the final hem on a curtain she'd been piecing together from flour sacks Silas had traded for in town. He'd gone to collect the last of the lumber from the Sawyer's mill, the wagon creaking off at first light. He hadn't gone alone, he'd taken her list with him, carefully folded into the inside pocket of his coat. She hadn't asked him to. He'd just taken it with a nod after quietly adding coffee beans and a spool of thread in his own hand. Josie paused her stitching and looked around the room. The lean-to had grown into more than she'd expected. The walls were tight and lined, the windows set with thick panes that didn't rattle when the wind rose. The cradle Silas had built sat at the foot of the bed, carved with a simple wildflower pattern she hadn't noticed, until one night she'd leaned over to soothe Eliza and traced the edge with her fingers. There was no part of this place that hadn't passed through his hands. And now, more and more, hers too. The door creaked open just before noon. Boots thumped against the threshold. Josie stood, wiping her palms on her apron. "You're back early." Silas stepped inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Mill was quicker than I thought. And I found something." He set a wrapped bundle on the table. Josie untied the cloth and lifted the lid of a small wooden box. Inside was a pair of new scissors and a folded scrap of calico in a soft blue. "I thought you could use fabric that wasn't part of a sack," he said. She ran her thumb along the edge. "This is finer than anything I've stitched. I figured you ought to have something that was just yours." She turned to face him fully. "You listen better than any man I've known." "I've had good reason to." She stepped closer, her hand still resting on the cloth. "You ever think about what comes next?" He held her gaze. "I've been thinking about it every day since you walked into that barn." Josie's voice barely rose above a whisper. "I want this to be my home, for Eliza, for me, for you if you'll have it." Silas reached for her hand, turning it gently in his. "I already do." They stood in the middle of the room, nothing between them but breath and the long road that had brought them both here. Then she leaned forward, slow and sure, and he met her halfway, their lips finding each other without question or hesitation. Behind them, Eliza cooed softly in her cradle. Josie smiled against his mouth. "She's part of this too. She always was." Later, they sat by the fire, Josie's head resting on Silas's shoulder, Eliza cradled in his arms. The flickering light danced on the walls, casting long shadows that didn't feel so lonely anymore. "I want to plant something this spring," Josie said quietly. "Something that grows deep roots." Silas kissed the top of her head. "We'll make a garden, put in rows of beans and squash. Maybe even tomatoes if we can fence it from the deer." She closed her eyes. "My grandmother used to say you can tell a good home by how the ground smells when you turn it. We'll find out come thaw." They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the pop of the fire and the soft breaths of the baby sleeping between them. The days that followed unfolded like a slow, steady song. The snow melted by inches, revealing dark earth beneath. Josie planted sprigs of mint along the south wall, and Silas built her a bench from leftover pine. Eliza learned to roll onto her stomach, and her laughter filled the room like birdsong. One morning in March, Silas brought in a folded sheet of paper and handed it to Josie. "I wrote to the clerk in Rawlins. Asked what it'd take to make this place ours together." Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. "You want to sign it over? I want you to have your name on it beside mine." She looked up at him, tears gathering but not falling. "Then I want to marry you." Silas nodded once. "That's what I've been hoping you'd say." They married in the clearing behind the barn, just as the first green pushed up through thawed soil. The preacher came from town in a rickety wagon, and the neighbor's daughter brought a basket of biscuits still warm from her mother's oven. Josie wore a dress made from the blue calico Silas had brought her, and a ribbon tied in her hair. Eliza wore a bonnet stitched from scraps, tugging at it with curious fingers while Silas held her during the vows. They kissed under the open sky, the cottonwoods just beginning to bud. And when they stepped back into the cabin that night, hand in hand, it was as husband and wife. The years that came after were not without their trials. Drought brushed close one summer, and a cough lingered too long in Eliza's chest one winter. But the roof held, the garden grew, and the laughter inside their home outlasted every storm. Silas taught Eliza to ride on the old bay mare he'd once said had spirit. Josie taught her letters, then stories, then how to bind a book with thread and patience. And every night when the lamps were low and the wind moved gentle outside, Silas would draw Josie close and say, "You saved me." And Josie always would answer, "We saved each other." Their love was not loud, but it was steady. A home built board by board, word by word, hand in hand, strong enough to last, gentle enough to hold. Always together, always home.